For decades, Americans have been fed a lie that government is wasteful, oppressive, and unnecessary. This belief has been carefully cultivated by those who benefit from its destruction: corporate interests, ideological extremists, and political operatives who seek to dismantle public institutions for their own gain. They have sabotaged government functions, defunded essential services, and manufactured crises, all while convincing the public that government itself is to blame. Their strategy is simple: break the system, then point to the wreckage as proof that it was never worth saving. At this moment, Republicans in the Senate need Democratic support to pass a continuing resolution to keep the government open, but business as usual is not an option. The time has come for Democrats to do what Republicans have done time and again: shut it down. The reality is that government is only invisible when it functions. People don't notice safe food, clean air, or disaster relief until they're gone. Every missed paycheck, every stalled program, every delayed service is not just a temporary inconvenience. It is a reminder of what is at stake. If a few weeks without funding can bring critical functions to a halt, what would permanent cuts do? Democrats have the power to force that realization. Instead of folding to another stopgap budget that keeps the crisis on repeat, they must take a stand. A government shutdown is not a failure, it is a reckoning. It is the moment when the illusion of government's uselessness collapses under the weight of reality. The anti-government narrative survives only as long as its consequences remain hidden. The shutdown must reveal the truth, that government is not the enemy, but the foundation of stability, security, and progress. This is not about dysfunction. It is about making the cost of defunding government undeniable. To succeed, the shutdown must be framed as a necessary stand. Its consequences must be understood as proof of government's value, and its resolution must leave no doubt about who tried to break the system and why. The strategy unfolds in 3 phases: framing the shutdown as a moment of reckoning, shaping the information environment, and controlling the resolution to secure victory. If executed correctly, this will not just end a budget fight. It will end the illusion that government can be cut away without consequences. This is not about short-term disruption. It is about permanently destroying the anti-government mythology that has dominated public discourse for generations. The fire must fall, and when it does, it must burn away every illusion that allowed this deception to take root. Only then will the country be ready to move forward. Phase 1. Framing the shutdown as a moment of reckoning. The first challenge is shaping public perception, defining the shutdown not as a failure of government, but as proof of its necessity. The narrative must shift from the idea that this is a temporary inconvenience to the realization that it is a direct consequence of efforts to dismantle public institutions. This phase establishes the foundation of understanding through 3 interwoven processes: framing the narrative, targeted messaging, and exposing the root cause. In order to frame the narrative, the purpose of the shutdown must be clear. This is not a budgetary dispute, but a stand against the dismantling of the government. Agencies are being gutted, workers fired, programs ended. The shutdown will not end until normal legal process is restored. Immediate pain is necessary because long-term pain is worse. This must be the moment when the consequences of government sabotage become undeniable. The key message is: government is not the failure, its sabotage is. Targeted messaging speaks to the interests of different groups. Different audiences process political events through different lenses, meaning messages must be tailored to maximize their impact. The general public should be reminded that you only notice government when it stops, while business leaders must be made to see that markets fear chaos more than government. Federal workers and those directly affected should hear, "Better to wait for your paycheck now than to never see it again." Each of these statements ties the shutdown back to its real cause: an ideological war against public institutions. Then expose the root cause in the most simple and logical way possible. It is easy to get caught up trying to explain decades of systematic defunding, deregulation, and deliberate erosion of public trust. But that is not the question. The question is, why does everything grind to a halt the moment government funding stops? This question forces the logical equivalence of service failure and funding cuts into view. This equivalence allows supporters to argue the shutdown purely as protection of services and reframe complaints about the suffering the shutdown causes as a demonstration of why government is necessary. While acknowledging the immediate pain, explain that it is always less significant than making permanent cuts. These elements work together to shape the narrative. Framing the shutdown with a clear purpose and objective makes it easy to message and reinforces the root cause. Targeted messaging ensures that different groups receive aligned arguments that resonate with their pre-existing beliefs. Providing a simple root cause as the fundamental link between funding and services keeps messaging consistent and is the key to undermining the irrational belief that government services can be improved through cuts. When these three forces align, the public's frustration is directed not at the shutdown itself, but at the forces that made the shutdown necessary. Phase 2. Shaping the information environment. With the shutdown framed as a necessary stand to protect government, the next step is ensuring that our framing is the dominant narrative. This is not just about getting our message out, it's about making sure no other interpretation takes hold. We must control the terms of the debate so that every discussion about the shutdown reinforces the idea that temporary pain now is the price of preventing permanent destruction later. This phase is executed through three interwoven processes: amplifying credible messengers, seizing media narrative control, and reframing the consequences. Amplifying credible messengers means putting the most sympathetic and authentic voices at the center of the conversation. The shutdown cannot be explained by politicians alone. It must be humanized by those directly affected. Federal workers must be vocal, not just about their financial hardship, but about the permanent job losses and program eliminations they are preventing. Business leaders must explain how economic instability is dangerous, but that gutting government infrastructure is even worse. First responders and community leaders must make it clear that this shutdown is a warning, a preview of what life would look like if the anti-government extremists get their way. These voices ensure that the shutdown is not seen as a political stunt but as a necessary fight for survival. Seizing media narrative control requires ensuring that the shutdown is not treated as a generic budget fight, but as a battle for the future of public institutions. Media coverage must reflect that this is not about dysfunction, but about defending government from those who want to dismantle it entirely. Every major disruption, missed paychecks, delayed benefits, halted programs, must be fully acknowledged, but always with the same takeaway. This is what anti-government extremists want permanently. We are making sure it only happens temporarily. When reporters ask about the harm being caused, the response must never be dismissive or evasive. Instead, we amplify the harm and immediately turn it into an argument for why the shutdown must continue. Yes, this is bad, but imagine if it were permanent. That's what we're preventing. Reframing the consequences ensures that every attack on the shutdown reinforces our message instead of undermining it. The opposition will say, look at how many people are struggling right now. This shutdown is cruel and unnecessary. The response must be exactly, this is what happens when government services stop. That's why we refuse to let them be dismantled permanently. If they argue that the shutdown proves government is failing, agree. A shutdown government is a failed government because people depend on government. That's why we're fighting to save it. The goal is not to dismiss the suffering caused by the shutdown. It is to embrace it as proof of why this battle matters. Every disruption, every delay, every missed check must be used to remind the public what is at stake: temporary hardship versus permanent loss. These three processes work together to ensure that the shutdown is understood not as chaos, but as a moment of clarity. Amplifying credible messengers allows those directly affected to share their experiences in their own words, making the reality of government's necessity undeniable. Shaping the media narrative ensures that coverage reflects the shutdown's true cause: systematic defunding and sabotage, not political dysfunction. Reframing the consequences keeps public frustration focused on those who made the shutdown necessary, rather than those holding the line to protect government itself. This is not about manufacturing a message. It is about letting the truth emerge, unfiltered and undeniable. As the shutdown continues, frustration will build, pressure will rise, and resistance to permanent cuts will take on a life of its own. The role of political leadership is not to micromanage the narrative, but to hold firm, allowing the natural momentum of public outrage to shift the debate. When that happens, the shutdown will not be seen as a crisis manufactured by those defending government. It will be seen as a crisis caused by those who have spent years trying to dismantle it. Phase 3. Controlling the resolution to secure victory. The shutdown cannot end on the opposition's terms. It must end in a way that not only restores government functions, but also solidifies public understanding of why those functions exist. This is not just about restarting agencies or passing a budget. It is about ensuring that the country internalizes the lessons of the shutdown and demands real protections against future dismantling efforts. The shift back to an evidence-based approach must be allowed to fully take hold before the crisis is resolved. This requires 3 interwoven processes: amplifying solutions, building political coalitions, and public mobilization. We begin with amplifying solutions. As the shutdown's effects accumulate, the natural next step is to channel public frustration into a clear, evidence-based resolution. Every disruption, whether it's delayed disaster relief, halted infrastructure projects, or missing paychecks, must be connected to the programs they depend on and the support required to prevent their failure again. This is not about framing the shutdown as a victory, but about demonstrating that the way forward is already known. The institutions being threatened were created for a reason, and their necessity is now being relearned in real time. Workers, business leaders, and local officials must articulate not just the damage caused by the shutdown, but the long-term solutions that will prevent future crises. This phase is about reinforcing the link between the problems exposed and the policies required to fix them, ensuring that the shutdown ends with a renewed commitment to functional governance. For any resolution to last, the political landscape must shift accordingly by building political coalitions. That means making the shutdown's lessons stick by forcing lawmakers, business leaders, and public officials to take a stand, not just on reopening the government, but on protecting it from future attacks. Rather than treating this as a partisan fight, this phase must focus on pulling in all those who have a vested interest in stability. Governors and local officials, regardless of party, will have faced the real-world consequences of the shutdown and should be positioned as key advocates for long-term solutions. Business leaders who initially demanded an end to the crisis must be pressed to support structural protections rather than just a return to the status quo. Even those who were initially indifferent must be confronted with a choice: stand for functional government or risk being blamed for future instability. The final step is ensuring that public mobilization makes retreat impossible. The frustration and anger caused by the shutdown must be converted into direct political action, whether through protests, strikes, or mass advocacy for legislation that secures government functions against future sabotage. The shutdown must end not just with a resumption of services, but with a clear public mandate against the ideology that allowed the crisis to happen. Crucially, this mobilization must extend beyond the shutdown itself. The lesson must carry forward, shaping future debates over government funding, policy priorities, and the role of public institutions. This is how the shutdown leaves a lasting impact, not as a temporary disruption, but as a turning point in the country's political trajectory. Resolution is not dictated from above, but develops naturally as the public experiences the shutdown and connects its disruptions to the policies that cause them. These approaches reinforce one another, ensuring that the shutdown ends only when the country fully internalizes the necessity of government. Each element strengthens the others, making a return to the status quo untenable. Amplifying solutions ensures that frustration with the shutdown does not remain abstract, but leads to a clear understanding of what government provides and why it is failing now. As solutions become widely recognized, they fuel political coalitions by forcing leaders, businesses, and institutions to take a stand. These coalitions, in turn, lend legitimacy to the solutions, helping them spread further. Meanwhile, public mobilization transforms understanding into action. Workers, affected citizens, and advocacy groups organize, ensuring that solutions are not just accepted but demanded. The more mobilization grows, the more pressure builds on hesitant leaders to align with real solutions rather than seeking a weak compromise. Political coalitions form in response to both solutions and mobilization. As the shutdown's consequences become undeniable, even those initially neutral are forced to take sides. Mobilization makes inaction politically impossible, while the clarity of solutions provides an obvious path forward. These coalitions further amplify solutions, helping turn public frustration into concrete policy shifts rather than just temporary fixes. At the same time, mobilization is strengthened by both coalitions and solutions. People take action not just because they are angry, but because they understand what is at stake and have political allies reinforcing their demands. As these forces interact, they create a self-reinforcing cycle where the only viable resolution is one that rejects further dismantling and commits to a stronger, more functional government. The shutdown has exposed not just the necessity of public institutions, but also the consequences of allowing them to be weakened. The goal is not to return to what existed before. What existed before was already compromised by decades of sabotage. Instead, the process demands a shift toward rebuilding government in a way that ensures it can no longer be systematically undermined. The shutdown forces a reckoning. If government is essential, it must also be made resilient, effective, and capable of delivering for the people it serves. If it takes weeks, it takes weeks. If it takes months, it takes months. But when it ends, it must leave behind a changed political reality, one in which the necessity of government is undeniable, and those who fought against it have lost forever. Demand your senator stand against the continuing budget resolution. The time for half measures and compromise has passed. This is not just another budget fight. It is a battle for the future of public institutions. A government shutdown, if wielded with purpose, can shatter the decades-long lie that government is the problem and expose those who have sought to dismantle it for their own gain. But for this to succeed, Democrats in the Senate must take a stand. We cannot allow another short-term patch that keeps the government running while the forces of destruction continue their sabotage. The shutdown must last until the public understands unequivocally that government is essential and that those who seek to dismantle it are the true threat to the nation's well-being. This is a moment of reckoning, and we must seize it. Call your senator today. Demand that they oppose the continuing resolution and refuse to restore funding until the fight to dismantle government is decisively defeated. Tell them to hold their mud. Tell them not to give in until public institutions can never again be treated as disposable. The tether snaps, the weight is shown, a world unmoored will seek the known, through the ruin hands restore to build it stronger than before.